Hey guys, welcome back. I'm Tyler. This is my tabletop. Welcome to Pinning 101. Today we're going to be pinning my giants. You're going to need a pin vise of the diameter of the wire you're using. You need a sharp knife. You'll need some wire. I'm using 16 gauge or about 1.6 mil. You'll want some super glue and some 5-minute epoxy. Also some rubber bands and a set of wire cutters. So the first thing we're going to do, step one, we're going to prep. Now what I didn't film is that I marked out my wire in 3/8 of an inch increments so that I could cut them later. But I'm breaking off the arms of my giants so that I can pin them. So I find that the important step for getting good pinholes is to cut these pilot holes. Just take a sharp knife, hobby knife, and just put it where you want the pin to be and just spin it around. You're just trying to gouge just the smallest of holes so that the drill bit will sit and it won't wander. If you've ever tried to drill a hole in wood or something like that, and you didn't do this, you may have noticed that your bit may wander. So by putting a hole, just a mark that it can catch on, it won't wander anywhere. So obviously after you put your pilot hole, we're going to drill the pinhole. Now for depth, it depends on what you're using. These giants weigh a lot. They're pretty heavy. The pieces are heavy, so I want pretty deep pins. Now I'm cutting the pins. Obviously, this step, you could go ahead and cut all of the pins that you want to use. I would suggest dry fitting them. Just make sure that they're as deep as you want them. Now, because of the way 5-minute epoxy works, we're going to batch glue these. So we'll glue one set of pins, let them dry, and then we'll come back and drill the complementary holes that the pins will go into on the other part. So you want to go ahead and drill and prep the pinholes for as many pieces as you can. So that's what we're doing now. We're just going to go ahead and run through. Alright, so I'm just going to quickly speed through this part. The other tool that I didn't list. You're going to want a Sharpie or some paint. A Sharpie works, but the way these clippers work makes a very sharp edge on the wire, so a little bit of paint in any color you want might work a little bit better. You're going to use that to mark where the pinhole, the complementary pinhole, is going to go. Alright. And we're pretty much finished. Next you guys get to see me fight with the epoxy. So it's a new bottle of epoxy. Follow the directions. I'm using Gorilla Glue brand because that's the brand that was at my local Home Depot. The problem that you're going to see that I'm having with it is getting it to like I'm following the directions for opening a new bottle, and I'm having trouble getting it to squeeze out the way. So it says to squeeze the air out of the top, and then, but it didn't want to squeeze. And I didn't want to, it's not that I'm not strong enough, it's that if you put too much strength into it, oh my god, you're going to squirt epoxy resin all over your freaking workbench. Epoxy glue, I guess, not resin. So use according to instructions, mix well, and then we're going to glue. You have very limited time, just a couple of minutes before that amount gets, before it starts drying. So go through and put all of the pins in the first holes that you drilled, and then we're going to leave them. Let them dry. I left these to dry overnight. I don't think you have to wait quite that long. Once again, follow the instructions. Now, the next step is we're going to trim off the pins. I made them too long on purpose. Metal wire is fairly cheap for the amount we're using, and so it's better to have too much so that you have a good handle than to not have enough. Yeah, so basically what we're doing now is once you get the wire trimmed, you're going to take your Sharpie or your paint and you're going to put a dot on the tip of the wire. And then you're going to push the pin into where the hole needs to go so that it leaves a mark. Now, my wire wasn't so much leaving the Sharpie as it was just digging into the pin, digging into the plastic. It's hard to tell. But then it's a repeat of the first part. We're going to drill a little pilot hole, and then we're going to cut a little pilot hole, and then we're going to drill the pinholes. Now, you want to make sure, which I listed as the next step, but you want to dry fit. Make sure that the pinhole is deep enough. I was having a little bit of trouble. But once again, it's all about drilling far enough. It's hard to drill too far. The epoxy fills up some space. I guess you could drill all the way through, but that's usually not a problem. But we're gonna, once again, we're gonna prep all of the holes before we start mixing up another batch of epoxy, because once that stuff starts going, it's it's hard to work with. So, this part actually takes a little while. So, I'm gonna super speed it, and I'll catch up with you guys in a minute. Alright. Time was a little too short for music, so. Okay, so we've mixed up our epoxy. Now we're going to glue the parts on. The problem is epoxy doesn't hold for the first. It doesn't hold very well in the time durations that we're talking about. If you were pinning things that were big and flat, you could use a vise or something like that. Oh, and there's where I totally forgot that those parts come apart, and so I had to quickly get out the super glue. So I wound up putting a little bit of super glue on the seams, like in between the parts along with the 5-minute epoxy. So the 5-minute epoxy is going to hold the pin, and the super glue is going to hold the 5-minute epoxy. It'll hold the parts on until the epoxy cures. So wrap them with a rubber band to get them to not move. And you can see here I'm just holding the parts together until the super glue connects. And then we repeat with the next giant. Now, you'll be able to see as I get onto the third one that I was actually taking too long. The epoxy got very hard, got overly tacky to the point that I couldn't really work with it anymore. And then I fiddled with this giant too much and broke him off of his base, which you'll see soon. Yep, there it is. Oops. So I had to cut the basic material off of his feet, and it's just a process. The other thing I noticed is that, so obviously these are 3D printed parts. They're not, I mean, they're good models, by all means. But I had pretty big gaps, and part of that is that I may not have put the complementary pinholes in the perfect spots, and so they weren't snug. But I think if I were painting another one of these models, I would probably pin them together before I painted them, so that the paint could kind of cover over the gaps. And even I might even use some green stuff to really gap fill, because these shoulder gaps are a little egregious. It works. If you're using smaller parts, you can use thinner wire. 16 gauge wire is pretty thick. Like I said, it's like 1.6 mil diameter. That is not small wire. But these are heavy parts, so use heavy wire. I don't actually have a these are done turntable shot for these, but they turned out well. Once they cured all the way, I took the rubber bands off, and I haven't had any problems with them. They have not fallen off yet. So, like I said, things that if you can, maybe pin before painting. If it's not a section that you really need to keep apart to paint it properly, that would be my advice. But overall, it worked. So my giants are a little sturdier. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked it, like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. I will talk to you guys again soon. I'm Tyler. This has been my tabletop.